Soundscribe.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not, I repeat, we do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Here's a drop of this week's hot sauce. If you want the full bottle, please visit our YouTube or Facebook page.
So for this hot sauce topic, there's something I ran across. It's been a topic for the last few days on several social media platforms. It's basically discussing how Black men tend to date non-Black women, and whenever they have some sort of falling out with them or some sort of catastrophe happen with them, going to the internet and basically speaking out about it and possibly have an expectation from Black women to basically save them or to be on their side.
I want to care so much about Black men being up in arms about this particular topic and us not being there to catch them when they fall, but I don't give a damn.
There's no way that you have seen historically how you have been treated in this country and then pretend as if that these individuals somehow have some sort of great history lesson on your life.
My problem comes in when you say, I don't like Black women as a Black man.
But it still says a lot when your preference looks a specific way. That says a lot about what's going on in your own head. Because self-hatred is a thing. This is a thing. And my thing is, do you love your mama? Like, is she beautiful to you? Is your Black mother beautiful to you? Or your Black daughters beautiful to you when that is your preference?
When you're asking, like, do you love your Black mother? Maybe they don't. Maybe they've seen some things with their Black mother that they would not want in a partner. And they decided, I'm not dating Black women from here.
When you look at music videos, when you listen to lyrics, like there's a whole R&B artist, and I was in love for decades, who said I had to cop that foreign. You know what I mean? Like, that's the whole song. And then, like, when you look at music videos, you constantly see the exotic girls.
It's making me think a little bit about, like, our younger girls, our younger Black girls who are hearing this, who are on the internet. Not young, like, child, but, like, teenagers, young adults, even in your late 20s. Because you don't really come into your own until a little later in the game. And that's where Suge's talking about, you feel like for a long time you got to wake up. You got to have a wig on. You got to put your eyelashes on. You got to put your makeup on. You can't leave the house unless you're fully done up, because you never know what anybody's going to say, right? But going back to what I was trying to say is, like, thinking about how this affects our young girls who are forming their identity. And you're hearing all over the internet how, you know, Black men don't like Black women, right? Or saying that they don't want to date a Black woman. That takes a toll on your mental health, especially when you don't quite know who you are. And a lot of times that can lead to people feeling suicidal, or feeling like they don't have a place that they fit into this world. If they don't fit in with their Black men, and they don't fit in with the non-Black men or women, and then maybe they feel isolated from their families, like, where does that leave you? Where do I fit in? And that does often lead to suicidal thoughts.
Soundscribe.
This episode features conversations and discussions around suicide as a part of Suicide Awareness Month. Suicide can be a sensitive topic for some. Viewer discretion is advised.
According to the CDC and other websites, we know that white men and American Indian have the highest rate of suicide in the country.
According to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, rates of suicide among Black youth have risen faster than in any other racial ethnic group in the past 2 decades, with suicide rates in Black males 10 to 19 years old increasing by 60%. Early adolescent Black youth are twice as likely to die by suicide as compared to their white counterparts. This increase among Black youth places the Black community in 5th place overall for suicide.
Today, we just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that put people at risk of thinking about or attempting suicide, and also, what to do about it. How do you identify when someone is actually seriously contemplating it, and what can you do to help that person out? I work a lot with teenagers and kids, so I'm always going to bring that perspective. One of the biggest things for kids and teenagers is that parents don't really ask how they're doing. Like, if the kid looks happy, if the teen looks happy, they're going about their day to day, they seem to be doing semi okay in school, they're real calm and really not getting into much at home, parents tend to say, like, yeah, they seem happy, they're fine. But I always encourage parents to ask, like, straight up, how are you feeling? Have you been feeling sad for no reason? How do you feel about yourself? A lot of the times, low self-esteem, low self-confidence can be a risk factor for a child to think about suicide. Also, exposure. Exposure. Do not assume what your kids or your teenagers know or don't know, because they have access to technology right now. So when we're talking about suicide and killing yourself, you may assume that a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old doesn't know what that word means. But because of technology in society, especially if your kid's on YouTube, they've probably heard that word. So I'm always into, like, checking in with your kids and seeing how they're doing.
You know what? I want to piggyback off of you. I know sometimes parents think, oh, you must have heard that from somebody else. And that's why they think sometimes their kids might be thinking about it instead of, like, sometimes it being a real natural emotion. And I think, like, even in, like, middle schoolers, because I know, just like, talking to my daughter, like, I've heard that before, well, I want to die by suicide. And I'm like, well, okay, well, where did you get that from? And then, like, just talking to her, she's heard people talk about it, like you said, exposure. But then, like, she's thinking, like, okay, well, those might be feelings that are real because there are people who pick on other kids, and kids don't necessarily know how to hone their emotions and work through their emotions at that age. And so sometimes suicide is a final act because they just get tired of being involved in, feeling bad about themselves, or the social anxiety with going to school every day, or just not, or being alone. Because there are some situations that we don't even know about on a day-to-day basis that people go through.
I want to take it from a systemic perspective. As a social worker, there's a lot of things that we address from a systemic level, working with several individuals. And homelessness is suicide. Capitalism is suicide. Inequity or inequality is suicide. And there are a lot of systemic barriers and challenges that we have as society that have driven people to unalive themselves. Now, we may think that suicide is just an individual thing. However, people often skip over the fact that there are systems in place that have uh, severely neglected a lot of individuals. And when your needs are not met, especially your basic needs, some people are driven to literally to the end because of the systemic issues. And so when we discuss suicide, I always try to include the systemic part because we often don't look at it as something that it can affect us.
So I wanted to swing back. The systemic issues are absolutely crucial. They are factors that impact what a person deals with from a level of oppression, oppression, and all those different factors. But I want to swing back to our youth for just a second. Another thing that I've noticed, at least with my own children, um, is how overwhelmed children are now, just with all the things that they see in the world and in society and in school. They're very overwhelmed. And a lot of times, we as adults and past generations, we take this idea of, well, we had it harder and they got all of these amenities and they should be fine. And they're not fine. They're really overwhelmed by all these amenities. They're overwhelmed by all this stuff. And even with having, like, I have 4 kids, my middle daughter, when you compare your children, that's another thing that can make a child overwhelmed, because they're trying to reach this level that they see these other kids at. Like, my brother is doing this, or my sister is doing this, or the girls in school are doing this, and I'm not doing that, or I don't know how to do that. So they feel like I don't have a place here. I'm out of place. So you really have to pay attention to that child that's kind of shy and held back and feeling overwhelmed a lot.
Ash, I like that you said that. Like when you start talking about like comparing the children or the children even being overwhelmed, um, because one thing that I don't do, and if there's going to be a lot of people who don't agree with this, and there's going to be some people who do, I'll double down on it, is that I don't do homework for more than 20 to 30 minutes a night. I'm not doing it because, first of all, after living in Europe for all those years, they don't even bring home homework. And those kids are just as smart and they're excelling, if not better, than the U.S. And I don't agree with sitting your kid at the desk for 2 hours doing homework because it's pressure. And so if you think about it, how we sit there and we do all the schoolwork, and we all went to school, we've done schoolwork, and then, you go to work. When you come home, you want to relax. That's your spot where like you get your reprieve. You want to kick your feet up. You don't want somebody over your shoulder hollering out, "Did you do this? Did you do that?" for 2 hours after a full day of learning. Like, they need time to be kids. And so I give my kids that mental health time, and it just has to be okay. And then Isaac's second grade teacher, during COVID, she was like, "Don't try to be your kid's teacher. Let them be kids and just let them go ahead. They're going to learn regardless." And that's not to say, let them be dumb or let them not learn, or this is what they didn't learn in class. But kids need to unwind too.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, Shug, because I think oftentimes people don't want to have that conversation about how they can play a part of someone's decision to want to unalive themselves or even attempt. We don't talk about that interpersonal distress from our own family or our own close friends who have judged us, tried to make us do things that we don't want to do, or even overwhelm us with the type of tasks or duties or responsibilities that we just don't have the space to carry. And kids out of everybody tend to be overloaded with a lot of responsibilities, a lot of tasks, a lot of duties that they feel like they cannot complete. Because all kids, no matter what their parents do, kids tend to seek approval from their parents. No matter what, they want to be loved by their parents. They want to make their parents proud. They want to make the authority figures around them very proud. But sometimes we tend to pile on children and not understand that that does impact their mental space.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good thing, and I advocate for that too, Shug. Don't overwhelm your child. They cannot hold the weight like an adult. Their brains literally don't have the capacity. But again, we live in a capitalistic world where productivity
Mm-hmm.
is basically what makes up your success.
You know what, Auntie Keish, it's interesting you said that, because I was talking to my mom the other day, and we're in a new school district now with the kids. And this school district and their previous one didn't believe in homework like that. Very rarely would they send homework home, which I'm okay with. But my mom, now that we're in this new school district, they offer so many activities to the kids because they want to increase the attendance rate and things like that. And that's great and all. But my mom made the comment, she said, yeah, the more you keep them involved in things, the less likely they'll have time to get in trouble. And that's the thought process for a lot of parents. Keep you in everything because now you have less time to do anything bad. And I don't necessarily disagree with that mindset, but I'm also of the, if my kid comes to me and says, okay, Ma, I just need a mental health day. I can't. Okay, then you off today. You ain't going to no practice. You ain't got to go to school. That's fine. Like, you need a day. Because if we can take the day off work when we feel overwhelmed, they should be able to do that as well. And you have some schools who are actually allowing kids mental health days.
Yeah, and you're touching a little bit on family mindsets too, which also puts kids at risk of suicide as well. What I've been seeing recently, actually a lot, oddly enough, is parents who are trying to overcompensate. Like, they grew up in a family where they didn't get their needs met the way that they wanted, and so they're trying to meet their kids' needs, but they're doing it vicariously. Like, they're like, I wanted to be in this when I was younger, and I wanted to have this, and I wanted to have that, and I wanted to, so I'm going to give my kids all of this so that they can thrive and flourish and have everything that I ever wanted. And so while there's no ill intent, that's a whole lot for a kid. They in piano, and it's not even the fact of having the kid. If your kid wants to be in these activities and they're like, yeah, no, I really want to be in this. This is an escape for me. I love it. I enjoy it. I'm good at it. Great. But you putting your kids in 5, 6 different activities that they don't really even want to be in, but it's because you want to be a perfect parent. That's where your kids get overwhelmed, because they're like, I have to do this, and I also have to impress my mom or my dad and put my all into it. So family mindsets. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's me. I'm perfect parents. So I'm about to speak to this from my perspective.
I
So,
wasn't trying to come at you though, just for the record.
that's
Just for the record.
I got big draws on. I got big draws. So, I am one of those parents that's like, gosh, dang it. Okay, I didn't have a lot of options because when nobody put me in nothing. And so, like, you know, I've had it said to me, well, you was never that good at this, or you were never that good at that. And I'm like, opportunities. And so I come from a perspective of, if you put the opportunity in front of your children, you know, you see a lot of kids in other cultures where they can play the piano. And if they don't want to do that, then they can, you know what I mean, they can do gymnastics. They are multifaceted. And for me, that was always a trigger for me, because it was kind of like, well, dang, I can't do anything if not go to school. So some people, like, I always come at it from this angle where my son, right? Just because you save a college fund and you have all these big dreams for your kids don't mean they're going to college. So what else can you do? Can I teach you how to work with your hands? Can I teach you how to play piano? If you're in Taekwondo, maybe you might not be the best judo or Taekwondo person, or, you know, karate or whatever you do, but you can open up your own dojo because you have a brain and then you have skills. And so I always try to give my kids extra skills, but that's also coming at it from a therapist perspective. When they say, Mom, I'm tired, I don't want to go today, then I'm like, okay, today we won't go. So I'll give an example. Elias is tired of Taekwondo. He don't like to stand there for that long and wait to kick and do all of that. So he said, I don't want to go anymore. And I'm like, well, bet I could save my whole lot of money a month and I'll just take you out. And so that's for him, because, okay, you tried it, you didn't like it, we can move on. And so I think it depends on how you do it and where you come from. So, because if, like, put Mimi in gymnastics at 1, she'd have been diagnosed with ADHD very, very early if I wouldn't have. But her being in gymnastics so early, she excelled at it. And so when she tried cheerleading and she didn't like it, I said, okay, bet you can go back to gymnastics. So I also gave them the choice, but I do expose them to everything.
But that's different. That's different than what I'm talking about. It's, you're giving them a choice and you're allowing them to have that space. If they say, I'm not feeling it today, that's cool. No. The parents I'm talking about are the ones that are like, you going regardless. I paid for it. You going to finish it, and you going to keep going, because you'll never know. Like, you're going to be good at this. I know you're going to be good at this. You got to do it. Right? So it's a little bit different, because you're doing it in a more understanding.
A lot of times the parents you talking about, Auntie Amber, are those parents who are trying to live vicariously through their kids. And that's never okay. Your children are individuals. They are not you. Whatever you missed out on, that was your life. This is theirs. You don't get to do that to them.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question about, so with you guys giving the choice to your children, I don't have children, but you guys do. And so when it comes to providing your children the choice, or even allowing them to take mental health days, what do you guys say to people who call you guys possibly soft, or say you're raising soft children?
That annoys me, because one, at the end of the day, if I'm raising a soft child, I'll still be raising an alive child. I don't need my child attempting to commit suicide because I didn't give them that space. So soft is, I don't like that. So I'm raising an emotionally intelligent child, and that's soft. Let's look back at the generations of unemotionally unintelligent people who now don't know how to function in this world and know how to interact with people. Like, that's a problem. So me allowing my children space is not making them soft. It's making them capable of saying no. Because as adults, a lot of us have a hard time telling people no. Somebody asks us to do something. Oh yeah, I do it, knowing doggone well we don't want to do it, but we don't know how to say no. So my kids will know how to say no. If that's not raising somebody soft, because if you don't know how to say no, that's a problem too. I'm not raising people pleasers.
I'm gonna be on the my bad. I'm gonna be on the flip side of this one. I don't think like you're making them soft or anything like that, but I do think that sometimes kids play you, and so when sometimes kids are playing you, and it's like I've spent my money for a whole year of this or for 6 months of that because you begged for it, and what I mean, it's something that you wanted to do, whether it's something that I wanted for you or not, then I'm gonna make you do it. So I do agree with holding them accountable. If you're paying for something, you're paying thousands of dollars, you're paying hundreds of dollars a month, or whatever you're paying for something. I do agree with holding them accountable. No, you can't just stay at home from school today because your stomach hurts. Because remember, some kids play you, and so I think it goes in knowing your kids. And if I know for a fact that something is really going on with my kid, it's not soft for me to, to tune into them or hone in and like see what's going on with them. However, in knowing my kids, sometimes I know, oh, you just don't want to do this today. And I think that, holding them accountable will make them also not be that person that tries to manipulate people with I need a mental health day kind of thing.
I agree
So
with you
I don't
too.
think it makes them soft, but I think you have to have discernment.
Yeah,
Let
and
me
I
say something about manipulation. Oh, sorry. I wanted to say something about the term manipulative when it comes to children. So my old boss taught me that children don't tend to be manipulative and they don't try to seek attention. They're seeking connection. And there is a reason why they're doing what they're doing. And they may want a day off, but they just don't know how to say that. So instead of them coming out being like, hey mom, I just can't do this or I don't want to do this, they will go around it because they may assume that they'll get in
Yeah.
trouble. Or depending on, now obviously with you, Shug, your reactions may be different for them, because I know you talk to your kids and have these conversations.
Yeah.
But for other parents, that may be an overreaction. And so they may be scared to get in trouble. So they have to find ways in order to let their parent know, like, I can't do this today, or I'm not up to it, or whatever their reasoning is. So I tend to try not to use that word manipulative because I know that there is something that they're trying to tell me. They just don't know how, or scared of what my reaction may be.
no, up until a certain age, then they get
Yes,
Yeah.
up
manipulative.
until a certain age.
So
Yes.
when they get into those preteens, teenage years, they get manipulative. But I'll respond to the question about being soft too. Well, respond to what Shug said first too, because yes, if you know your kids, you know when they're trying to get over on you. My daughter will say every single day, "I don't want to go to school. I don't feel good. Can I stay home and relax, mommy? I need to stay home and relax." Maybe one day out of every couple of weeks, I'll be like, you know what? For today, you've been doing a whole lot. You can stay home and relax, but it's not going to be every day. And that's not making her soft. A lot of people misinterpret this as the kids running away from their problems, right? Because you have kids that are getting bullied a lot at school. Bullying is one of those big risk factors for suicide too. I could talk about that for hours, days. But you have kids that are getting bullied at school a whole lot. Who wants to go to school and be in that if nobody's doing anything about it? So if my kid tells me like this person has been bullying me, I've talked to the teacher, she's talked to the teacher, ain't nobody doing nothing. We talked to the school, then absolutely you can stay home. You're not running away from anything. You are protecting your peace and your mental health at that point. That doesn't make you soft. That helps you learn how to address certain things in a more appropriate way versus going to school, acting out, being disruptive. You're like, I need to stay at home so I can at least like get back to regular and then go back to school and face this again.
Or people think it makes the parents think like it'll make their kids soft. It's like, oh, you know what, just don't worry about it, get over it. Everybody gets bullied and this, that, and the third, and that's just not okay. So I got a little story. My daughter at the beginning of last year was being bullied by 4 girls. 4 of them was on her. And so the first day I'm like, well, tell the teacher. And they was mad because she wouldn't move her seat so that they can all sit together. Because every kid is not in school to learn. Some kids are in school to get away from their problems. Some kids bring their problems to school and put it off on other kids. And so they were bullying her, and they just every day they was whispering in her ears. She couldn't learn. She would come home, she would be crying, she would be upset. I called the school. I called the teacher. The teacher said, leave her alone, leave her alone. The kid said, no, we're still going to bother her. And then it turns out that there was one ringleader, as usual, and the ringleader had all the other girls doing whatever she wanted them to do. And when the girls were alone, they wouldn't bother her. But that took a toll on her. So I ended up having to call the principal and being like, listen here, I'm a mental health counselor. If y'all need bullying prevention at your school so that my kid doesn't hurt herself or other kids are not hurting themselves, let me know. And then that's when you kind of get the ball rolling. Some parents are just like, don't worry about it. Have something snappy to say back. And every kid can't take that. And so some kids do take their lives because this is going to be the rest of my life. To them, it's magnified into the future. Teenagers have big imaginations and overreact to everything.
Oh,
Yeah,
and even
sure.
the bullies are also, like, I've taught my daughter that, like, no, it's not okay for somebody to bully you. And you pick your battles, right? You pick the time when you say something and, like, go for that person if they calling you names or whatever. But also recognize that bullies bully because they feel like they missing something. Or something ain't going right at home. Or something is going on with this kid, right? So bullies are also at risk of suicide, too. Because they're bullying because there's some kind of deficit or void that they're not having filled. And they get some kind of fulfillment and happiness from doing this to other people or making other people feel the way that they feel. I'm not excusing bullying, by the way. Side note, I do not condone it, and I make sure that my daughter handles it appropriately, but I also make sure she has compassion too.
Yeah, I want to touch on that because
these kids are
I've
dealing with something else,
oftentimes,
too.
whenever I have either dealt with it, because as a kid I dealt with bullies, and my kids have, each of them have dealt with bullies at least once. And the times with them where I have actually had a meeting with the parents, I literally see where that child got the bullying from. I literally see it. I'm like, oh, they don't know no better. They don't know no better. Look at their parents. They don't know no better. And that's just what it is. That's not to take that off of them, but they legit don't know any better. And I just want to piggyback on something Auntie Keith said earlier about manipulation, kids be manipulative. I had a teenage client, and her mother actually said, is she just doing this to get attention? And I said, yes, she wants you to pay attention. That's exactly what it is. It's not a bad thing when we say, oh, they just doing that for attention. Yes, they are. That means pay attention. That's what that means.
Yeah, so just to piggyback off of everything that we've all said, right? We know that kids are more at risk of suicide if they're being bullied, if they are a bully, if they're having those feelings of like hopelessness, helplessness, like no one can help me, I'm powerless, I don't have anything to offer to the society, I don't fit in anywhere, like a whole bunch of things, right? Also losing someone close to you, and then having exposure and access to violence, to firearms and things like that in the home. Those are all risk factors. But a major thing based on developmental age is impulsivity. Younger kids are way more impulsive than teenagers. Teenagers are a little bit more impulsive than adults, and I'm talking general. There are some individuals in between that are just impulsive, period, no matter the age. As you go up in the ages and the developmental stages, you'll see that there's less impulsivity. So kids who have all of these stressors on them will likely think of suicide and try to do it. Teenagers who have all of this on them, they'll likely think of it, develop a plan quickly, and try to do it. But when you get into the adulthood years, typically, maybe you sit with it for a little bit before you actually attempt it.
And we can give definitions to that when it comes to the brain. When that means that our prefrontal cortex is more developed as an adult, which is where all of our thinking and stuff comes from. So as a teen, it's not really as developed. So that impulsivity comes in. Definitely as a child, it's definitely not developed. But as an adult, like Amber was saying, or Auntie Amber was saying, we tend to think about it a little more. We call that executive functioning. So please remember that, and that we're using those skills as an adult.
You did touch on the executive functioning, and I was about to talk about that with the kids or adults, because a lot of times, I won't say a lot of times, sometimes in some cases people have untreated ADHD. So in ADHD you have executive functioning deficits. They can cause dysfunction in organization, impulsivity. People think that it's hyperactivity, but it's not really hyperactivity. It's actually impulsivity. And so that's the thing where you're like, oh, I think I should do this. I should do this. I can't help but do it. And so if you sprinkle that in with some depression and some anxiety, and if it's all severe enough, it could be the perfect storm for suicide. and for it to be done quickly without much thought.
I would like to. Well, let me add with other clinical disorders. You can have this with bipolar. I had just read some research with autism also being connected to individuals that are diagnosed with autism also having suicidal tendencies, schizophrenia, psychosis, just different type of clinical disorders or psychopathology that you may run across where suicide has also been something that has been a part of that.
In our community, we don't necessarily, sometimes we don't believe in all of these things. Or we'll say that child ain't got no ADHD, or that adult ain't got no ADHD, or I went my whole life and ain't nobody diagnosed me with ADHD. I've been fine, so I'm not going to get treated now. When actually treating ADHD, maybe bipolar disorder. I have a friend whose mother got treated for bipolar disorder, and he said it was night and day from when he grew up to what's going on now that she's treated, day and night. Like, it's like he wished that she had been treated growing up. And so, like, when you have the people who are untreated, it just makes the risk factor higher.
Now that we've talked a lot about children, I'd like to go into adulthood and what suicide looks like in adulthood. And according to statistics, men have a higher rate of suicide than women. And I would like to say that that debunks a lot of the whole women are more emotional. But I find it interesting that men have a higher rate of suicide. So I would like to bring up something that the professional basketball player said, John Wall. He talked about how he thought about or contemplated suicide. He had tore his Achilles, and that he is in the NBA, so that's basically his career. He had the passing of his mom, and his grandma was dying, and in the midst of COVID, he was with his mom taking her last few breaths, and just so many things he went through in those 2 to 3 years, and how the pile up of all these stressors can impact a person significantly. So I'd like to, discuss, what this looks like in adulthood and specifically for men, specifically our men, and what that looks like.
It actually doesn't shock me that adult men, would complete more suicides, simply because men don't have an emotional outlet. They're taught, don't cry. From little boys, you teach boys, don't cry, suck it up, be tough. So if I'm taught all my life I got to be tough, when do I get to be vulnerable? When do I get to be sad? When do I get to be upset? So if I don't ever get to be that, now I'm overwhelmed and now I am that, but I can't express it. So what I'm going to do now? So it doesn't even shock me that the statistic is higher for men, because it has less to do with women being more emotional and more to do with men never having a place to put their emotions.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, and that's like the strong black woman syndrome for men. It's the strong black man syndrome. It's like I don't have time to sit around crying about my situation when somebody has to eat and I got to take care of my kids. And on some token, I get when they say that. Like I overstand that. But at the same time, when do you get a chance to, like you say, express vulnerability and talk to somebody about something? A lot of men don't want to go to therapy. Black men are one of the last groups to go to therapy, and they really should be one of the first groups to go to therapy because of overexposure to gun violence, the strong black man syndrome, and being held down by other groups, the majority group. And so just not being able to, like you said, get that out, it's either you need to cry or you need to go seek some therapy, because otherwise the alternative is a permanent solution to a problem that does not have to last forever.
Black men have statistically always shown as the least likely to go to therapy, but a lot of men of color in general, like your Asian men don't typically go to therapy. Your Hispanic men, that machismo that the Latino American community has and community has, they men of color in general do not usually seek out therapy.
You're right, Ash.
And
Yeah,
I want
and
to add that they probably don't. Oh, sorry, Amber. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, you're good. Go ahead. Go.
I was just going to add that there are all different type of reasons why they don't. It could be because I don't want to, but also because they may feel like the people that they're sitting across may not understand the issues that affect men of color. And that has been brought up a lot. Like some of them, when I hear about them, saying, "Hey, my friend got shot or my friend got killed," and they just was like, "Oh, I'll pour one out for the homies and keep moving." Like, sir, how are you dealing with that grief? But they're like, well, even if I say what I need to say, how is this person going to relate to me? How are they going to understand what I've gone through or what I've even seen?
And well, Shug mentioned the exposure to violence, and Ashley has mentioned in the past the idea of intersectionality. So I just wanted to bring a perspective too on another risk factor is black men being in the military. A lot of the time, well, not all the time. I'm seeing more black men in my office who are in the military, which is great. It's wonderful. I love it that's increased so much. But also, it's like a double thing, right? You're taught in your family growing up as a child and as a teenager, don't cry, you don't show your emotions, you just keep on going. Then you're in the military where that culture is also you keep it moving. I don't care if you broke your foot in the middle of the daggum desert, you gonna keep going. I don't care, right? So they really do get in that mindset that I cannot show any kind of weakness. And if you can't show any kind of weakness, you, like Ashley is saying, Auntie Ashley is saying, you don't really have an outlet for it. There's nowhere that you can go to express that, other than the black men who've been in my office, which kudos to you for making that step. So yeah, it's like all of that just built up and just from the military, from your family, just all of that. And then I've heard way too many stories about them completing suicide.
I have a question, not to y'all, but to the audience of black men. Where do you think that comes from? And my opinion, it would be the patriarchal system. So, how do you re envision or reimagine the patriarchal system that has consistently told you you can't cry, you can't let it out, you can't be vulnerable? What does this look like reimagined for you? I don't know. Maybe that's something y'all can ask y'all husbands, but I'd love to
That's
hear the feedback from our audience and from your husbands, and let us know what that looks like differently for y'all. Because I'm not a black male, so I can't speak, or a man of color, so I can't speak on what that looks like reimagined for y'all.
I
Yeah,
think
and
that's
I
a
can.
good question, and they could put it in the comments before and after, and we will go ahead and answer and do a dialogue back because it is something that we need to know so that we can be putting correct information out there and so that we can be a voice for people who don't have a voice on this platform, and that's black men. So that's, I mean, that you hit, girl, look at you, you
I
good on your
like
feet.
I like that question. One thing we do not want to do here is we don't want to specifically speak for men or black men because we are not. We are for black women. So we can have all the statistics in the world, but we want to hear y'all experience.
So I wanted to clarify the difference between suicidal thoughts and intrusive thoughts.
Hmm.
And the reason why I was talking about intrusive thoughts is because I've never had suicidal thoughts, but recently I did have an intrusive thought. And the intrusive thought was, well, what if I wasn't here? And then I was like, well, I called my therapist because I was like, ma'am, I never had this thought. What is that? And I knew what it was, but just to have her unpack it with me was a big deal because sometimes you don't understand where those thoughts come from. And I still didn't understand where the thought came from. That's why it was called intrusive because we can't control the things that we think all the time, but sometimes things get in there and you may not know where they came from, but it doesn't mean that you are a suicidal person or that you're even thinking of completing suicide. It just means that sometimes you have intrusive thoughts and those thoughts might be a little bit stronger than you'd like them to be.
Yeah, and another term that I've used for that with my clients is passive suicidal thoughts. They are intrusive thoughts, but it's not necessarily that you are saying you want to kill yourself or you have a plan for it. It's just some passive thought. I've had those thoughts too before, just like, would people even care if I wasn't here anymore? Like, who would come to my funeral? Doesn't mean I'm thinking that I'm actually going to remove myself from the world, but it's just like a passive thought that it's weird. It comes out of nowhere, like you said. It's intrusive.
Yeah, I have to, and actually on my the mental status form that I use for clients, it actually has it differentiates between passive suicidal ideation, active suicidal ideation. Is very different. So the passive is more of those intrusive thoughts, and I've had those too. I've probably had them several times, and I actually probably have had active suicidal ideation about 2 times in my life. So I know what it's like to get to that point. So I'm big on normalizing it, because a lot of people feel like it's just so odd, or they're like crazy for having these thoughts. And I'm like, a lot of people have these kind of intrusive thoughts, or even have the active suicidal ideation. You're not alone in that. Like, the very people that you think are super strong and have it all together, they deal with it too. And I think it's important for people to know that, to kind of normalize, not normalize suicide, but normalize that this happens to any and everybody. It's no certain person that this happens to.
Right. I think as a child, well, as a teen, I had, suicidal thoughts and even engaged in self harm at some point. And I know that that's not something that people often talk about as well. That self harm can be a part of that. And what I mean by self harm is any act that you do to inflict pain on yourself. Some people cut their wrists. Some people use razors. Some people do all different type of things to inflict self harm on them, to take away whatever pain that they're feeling. And then not recently, but in 2015, when I was going to get married, I didn't. And for whatever reason, like Auntie Shook said, intrusive thought came in, like, what if I ran myself off the road? Like, it was like scary to think about that. But somehow it came through my brain, and I was just going through a hard time. And I was triggered from something I had watched in class that had something to do with the military, because I was going to marry a military guy. And for whatever reason, it triggered me, and I wasn't good for the rest of the day. So yes, those things do happen, even to people who are of higher status, people who are well, off good as far as financially, but that does not mean that they do not experience life stressors that may take them down a road of contemplating unaliving themselves.
I want to just mention something, Auntie Keish, before we go closer to the end of the episode. You mentioned self-harm. One thing I want to mention that is self-harm, that a lot of, especially younger people, I hear it a lot from teenagers and college age people, they don't realize that binge drinking is often a form of self-harm. If you had a horrible bad day, or a horrible breakup, or some things are just not going right in your life, and you drink to access because of that, to try to numb it out, that's a form of self-harm, because alcohol poisoning is a thing. You could literally end up in the hospital from over drinking. So
I've never heard that before.
Self-harm is not just cutting. Self-harm is anything that will harm you. And overdoing it with the drinking in one session can harm you. You can end up in the hospital getting your stomach pumped. That's harm.
But that's with intentionality though. Like, some people, like when some people binge drink, they're not necessarily always drinking with the intent to self harm. Some people self harm with intention to, like cutting, like to relieve pressure.
To feel the pain.
Yes.
Pain. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Sometimes binge drinking, you're not going into it with the idea that you want to hurt yourself, but sometimes you are. I've had a client say that I had to drink to numb everything. I just drank myself to sleep that night. Now, if you drinking yourself to sleep, you drank a lot to knock yourself out.
But that's not. I don't see that as self-harm. I see that more as coping. I mean, failure to cope, absolutely, but they're still trying to cope. And binge drinking may increase the risk that you're going to self-harm in the moment. But I don't know if it's actually considered self-harm by the definition, or by the way that we view it in the mental health field.
Yeah,
it could definitely cause self-harm.
And I can, depending on what the scenario is, I can see it as self-harm. At the end of the day, it led to harm. That college student who going to get their stomach pumped, that's a lot. Like, that's.
I can kind of get what you're saying. If it's paired with intentionality, I think.
Yeah.
That's when it's self-harm.
Yeah, self-harm has.
I mean, I can. Because, like, the way that we look at it is that it's like Shug was saying, it's a purposeful act. Like, you are cutting yourself to hurt yourself, to numb the feelings. You're, like, pinching or scratching. I mean, I've had people that bite their lips to get the skin off where you would look at it as anxiety, but it's they're biting it until they bleed, so you're harming yourself to deal with whatever is happening. So I guess if you put it that way, where like you intentionally, like you say, I'm going to have a whole bunch of drinks so that I can get alcohol poisoning, so I could numb all this stuff, then I could see it as self-harm. But typically in college, that ain't always the case. It's just like, I'm going to just go get drunk and drown out all my problems.
Yeah, I'm gonna drink till I pass out. That to me,
Pretty
pass
much.
out is harm. I'm gonna drink till I pass out is harm.
Yeah.
And I used to do that, Auntie Amber. I and some people do know that about me. My anxiety
Drink till you
causes me
pass
to
out?
twist my head. No, girl,
Lip.
no.
Biting her lip.
I done passed out before, yes, but not
I
intentionally.
passed out, but not on purpose. Yeah, especially in college. Yes.
You drinking over there till you pass out, Lord. No. Twisting my hair is an anxiety thing for me, to the point of pulling my hair out and biting my lip to the point of my lip actually bleeding. Yes, that's something that I still at times engage in. I have to actually watch myself for that. When I notice that I'm doing that, I have to be like, okay, what's going on? What am I dealing with?
Yeah.
And that's called stemming. Really trying to relieve. It's a source of, it's a part of anxiety too. Trying to just relieve that pressure or whatever you're feeling. You have to do something physical just to get it out. I pick my eyebrows. I used to. I'm a cookie monster, so nobody will ever tell.
Well, one of the things. Oh.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say for me, like I said, I've never had any like active thoughts of suicide, but I've definitely had the passive thoughts. And for me, it was more like a self-confidence thing, and feeling like I didn't fit in to different. I think I talked about this on another episode where I didn't fit into, the Black community or the non-Black community. Like I just didn't have anywhere to go. No one was really accepting me. But then when I started accepting myself, I didn't really have those thoughts anymore. I haven't in a while. But it was a self-confident thing. And if you looked at me at the time, like you would have never thought that. Like I was always the happy, bubbly person at school. You would have thought that I thought everybody liked me, but I did not. I was always looking at people like, oh, I know this person's thinking this about me. This person's thinking this about me. So I try to just keep up the happy, bubbly personality. But it was always a self-confidence thing for me. I had low self-confidence all the way up until like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Then I was finally like, fuck everybody else. Like it's all like I love me, and that's all that matters. But for a while, that's what it was. Like, yeah.
But when people do have that low self confidence, or like they always appear bubbly and they always appear happy, that's a risk. That's like one of the things that you can look at, or a behavior change. Somebody who's Eeyore, and then all of a sudden they're not. All of a sudden they're really happy because they've made a decision. And so I think that that's something to pay attention to, even in our loved ones. Because just even talking about Robin Williams, I loved me some Robin Williams, but Robin Williams was always bubbly, always happy, always making people laugh, but then he completed suicide. And everybody would say, well, he was a comedian. All he did was joke, or all he did was make people laugh. But that's a coping mechanism also. Yep. And I know when I'm joking and I'm just over the top and can't stop joking, I'm usually sometimes a little bit sad in there, and I just have to laugh to keep from crying sometimes. And so I think coping mechanisms can be given in therapy. A lot of people won't go to therapy, but I give out great coping mechanisms. And people who already have coping mechanisms, I allow them to tailor it to whatever they want it to look like, just as long as they're okay.
Yeah, so since you're going into that, let's go ahead and hop into our foil and debunking a couple of myths around suicide, and talk a little bit about like how we talk about it, what we do about it, and all of that. Let's slide right on into that.
Soundstripe.
Okay, so one of the big myths of suicide is that everyone who completes suicide or attempts suicide has a mental health condition. This is a myth because basically it's just not true. Anybody can get to that point where they are suicidal or they have passing suicidal ideation like we talked about earlier. It's not just for people who have mental health conditions because, first of all, I want to clarify something for a lot of our viewers. You have to fit into certain criteria to be diagnosed with mental health conditions. If you do not fit those criteria, you won't be diagnosed with that condition. So that's why everyone who commits suicide doesn't have a mental health condition, because they don't fit all the criteria. It doesn't mean that they don't have issues. It doesn't mean that they are not struggling. It doesn't mean that they are not dealing with stressors. It just means they are not diagnosable because they don't fit the criteria. So this is why we can't continue to perpetuate this myth that if a person committed suicide, they have some type of mental health disorder or diagnosable condition. Depression and anxiety are the top two diagnosable conditions, and everybody doesn't fall into the criteria. You might have a little bit of depression or be sad, but you are not clinically depressed. You do not have generalized anxiety disorder. So you can't look at it like, well, they didn't have any diagnosis, and their doctor never said anything because they didn't fit the criteria. They might have just had a really stressful moment. Everyone has a breaking point. That's more so the way to look at it. Not like everyone who completes suicide has a diagnosis or a condition, but more like every human being has a breaking point. Some of us can get through that breaking point and some of us cannot. And that's just what it is.
One of the myths that I would like to debunk is talking about suicide makes you do it. And talking about suicide with somebody will not make them do it. 9 times out of 10, if you are talking to them about it, or that means that they've already thought about it, that means that they've showed you signs that they might be thinking about doing it, or it might be something that, they've attempted before. And so there is no, you can push them over the edge by just asking them the question. You can actually save them by just asking them the question. Sometimes the only thing that can make someone commit suicide is someone who wants to actually commit suicide themselves. So there's nothing that you can do to actually push somebody closer to committing suicide if they're already there, but you can help them stop it.
The myth that's often associated with suicide is that it's a selfish act. Well, first, we know that that's a myth, because unfortunately, when someone completes suicide or unalive themselves, it's often a last resort. And while somebody may unalive themselves, may be confusion for you and even cause some grief or regret, we have to think about how suicide was something that this person lost hope with everything else, and that was the only solution that was put in front of them. So when we talk about it being a selfish act, it's not.
The myth that I want to debunk is it happened out of nowhere. This person was happy, there were no signs whatsoever, and they just did it. It happened out of nowhere. And a lot of the times, if not all the times, that's untrue. There are always some kind of signs. There's always a reason. There's always something that happened at some point. It may not have happened right before this person attempted or completed suicide. It could have been something that happened years ago that they've been struggling with. But there is always something. There's always a reason. And in terms of, them being happy all the time, that is also a sign. If you have someone who shows a full range of affect, meaning that they show that they're happy sometimes, they show that they're sad sometimes, they show anger, they show all of these emotions in different ways, and then they just go to being happy all the time, that is a sign that something ain't right. Other signs of this is like change in eating habits. If you notice this person is not eating a lot, or they're emotionally eating and eating way too much, they're not sleeping a lot, they're sleeping way too much, changes in behavior from the way that one person was. So if they're typically sleeping a full night, and then it turns out that you find out they're only sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night or having naps throughout the day, that is also a sign. That can also be associated with some other mental health disorders like depression and anxiety. But like Auntie Keish was saying, you look for intent, you look for a plan, you look for a method, you look for the thoughts of suicide. You ask them directly, "Ooh, I see a lot of things have changed for you. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself?" And then also, a change in functioning in different areas. So if you have a kid or even an adult who's in school and you notice that their quality of their schoolwork is declining, whereas they would pay attention to things and try not to make those careless mistakes before. And now you read a paper and it's like all over the place. They're not even paying attention. What's going on? Same thing for kids. And also at home, right? You're typically a tidy person. You keep your house picked up. You keep your dishes washed. You take care of the home environment. And then you go visit that person and you notice that things are all over the place and they're just not doing anything. Check in with them. Check in with your kids. Check in with your friends. Check in with your parents. Check in with yourself to figure out what's going on. It may not be suicide, but at least you're asking. If you choose not to ask because you think this person is totally fine because they're happy all the time, then that's where there's a problem. No one's asking, so this person is not just going to openly share it.
I do have one more thing to say to that. Thank you so much, Amber. And you reminded me that when Auntie Amber was talking about, the house not being clean or somebody falling into depression is linked to suicide heavily. And a lot of people are afraid, especially in the Black community, to be on medication. And medication can help with intrusive thoughts. It can help with the depression because it boosts your serotonin, which is the happy drug. And that's one of the things that they might give you, even if you're in the mental hospital, is a drug that'll boost your serotonin, that'll get you a little bit happy, that'll make you think a lot more clear. And that's why I kind of am a proponent for medication, because if you have somebody that's on the brink of suicide, just that one thing could help them feel a lot better about themselves and feel a lot better about their situation, and it could sometimes save their lives.
I just want to provide some clarification too on the medication piece, because while the medication does address like your body's responses to things, like your physiological responses, heart racing, the serotonin levels, that happy hormones and all of that, it addresses that, but it does not always help with the thoughts. And that's why it's paired with therapy, because therapy helps you with reframing those thoughts,
Yes.
looking at things from a different perspective. Medication will not change your thoughts. It will help you think clearly, because sometimes it targets that prefrontal cortex and you're not as impulsive in your thoughts. It's not just popping around all the time. But therapy is really important to help calm those thoughts and reframe in the moment and learn how to look at things differently before you just do something.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Amber. They say medication helps the therapy and the therapy helps the medication.
As far as, there were no signs. There were no signs that this person was going to commit suicide. I can't remember exactly what you said, but I wanted to make sure that people knew at the end of the day, for the people in the person's life who does complete suicide, because we like to say complete now because commit makes it sound like a crime. For those who do complete suicide or unalive themselves, a lot of people who are left behind to mourn feel like it is their fault and it was something that they could have done. That is not true. That is flawed thinking. I know that we naturally will think that, but you might have missed the signs. We're not all always paying attention to things, or they're not very clear, but they're there. So I don't want anyone to feel like because they might have missed the signs, oh, this is now my fault. It's not. That person, if they got to the point where they were going to complete, they were going to complete no matter what you did.
Another myth is that suicide is a choice. And for this, suicide is a choice that a person makes to actually unalive themselves. However, suicide is not a choice, as Auntie Key said, because they were selfish. It's a last resort instead of, necessarily a choice. So some people make the decision to go ahead and just not want to be here anymore based on the feelings that they may not be enough, or this world is too much for them, or that people would be better off without them. And so choice is a very tricky word. It's a decision, and often it's the last big decision that people make because of just the way that they feel. Also, with the myth, you can't stop someone from committing suicide. You can't stop them if they're already, already committed to the act. However, if they come up to you and they tell you, I am thinking of, I don't need to be here, or I don't want to be here anymore. If they show any of those signs, you can stop them before they do it. You can try and stop them before they do it. It's never on the person that's actually trying to help them. Some of the reasons why people don't want to talk to anybody is because they don't want to end up in mental institutions. They don't want to end up with a stigma, and then everybody knows that they went to the mental institution because they wanted to kill themselves, and then now they're considered crazy. And so sometimes people don't say anything because of that. But if you are with someone and they're telling you what they're thinking about doing, or what they want to do, or if they're just telling you that they feel poorly and that the world would be better off without them, you can talk with them about maybe going to go get some help. And going to go get some help may look like inpatient treatment, but inpatient treatment comes with a lot of group therapy, a lot of individual therapy, and it may be able to relieve the symptoms that is causing the person to want to complete suicide in the first place.
Another myth that is associated to suicide, and y'all not gonna like this, is that it's a white people thing. Y'all gonna have to cut the shit because it's not a white people thing. And we have plenty of evidence and plenty of individuals who have of color who have taken their lives, and who have unalived themselves or even contemplated wanting to unalive themselves. We have to stop categorizing as, oh, you're going to hell if you kill yourself, or go lay down when you want to say, hey, I don't feel like I want to be here, or I have an active plan, intention, and a method to complete this. We have to stop pushing off our people wanting to do that, or have is driven to that solution, because what we're doing is we're invalidating them, and our people need validation, period. They just do. So we have to stop categorizing suicide as just a white people thing, and start looking at it from a bigger picture, and understand that we are suffering too as a community. We all know the statistics that we put out there, that men have a higher rate of suicide, and our youth suicide rates have gone up exponentially over the past couple of years. So it's important that we continue to address this in our community and understand that it's not just a white people thing.
Before we wrap up today, I just want to acknowledge that suicide is a very tough topic. We understand that. We know that this was a very triggering topic for some people. I have had suicide directly impact my family. And I think one thing that we want to make sure we touch on is there is the person who commits or completes the suicide, and then there's the family that is left behind. So that family that is left behind also needs resources, because dealing with a suicide is very different from dealing with a natural causes death, or even a shocking type of death that's traumatic. Suicide is still different. So that family that's left behind, there's a lot of questions. Usually there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of, what didn't I do? What did I do? How could I have stopped this? You need help too. You have to talk to somebody, because that's the only way to make it through. You are dealing with someone who completed suicide because they didn't know what to do, and that was their last resort. So you need the help, so that doesn't necessarily become your last resort.
Soundstripe.